on a Monday, as usual, we speak about nutrition and fitness. Today, we are keeping with the theme of nutrition, and we are looking at babies. Nutrition during the first year of your baby's life is very crucial, especially for their cerebral health, their growth and development. But most importantly, it's also a way of harvesting a nutritional diet for your child that's going to also have a long-term ramifications, right? Most people say, hey, breastfeeding in the first year is very, very significant. And it's true, you're right. But then also, many people say, I'm busy. I can't do it, and my life right now doesn't allow me to breastfeed. And also, in certain stages of that first year, you now start introducing a variety of purees and mashed foods. How do you gradually transition to finger foods and more textured family foods by the end of that year? It's something that we all need to learn a little bit more. Dr. Khutso Sebetseba joins us, a specialist pediatrician, and the Dr. K is going to help us on this particular conversation. And it's a crucial one because sometimes we're just winging it without really getting the expert help that we need. Dr. K, welcome on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I think you said that perfectly, that a lot of the time we're just winging it, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm quite impressed with how much you know. Can I just give you that?
No, I've got a 1-year-old, so I should know.
Okay, so experience is the best teacher, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but like you said, it's such an important topic, and not just for the first year of life, but for the first what we call 1,000 days, and we know that's from conception to just after the 2-year second birthday, and food is ridiculously important. Nutrition is ridiculously important, not just for brain health, like you mentioned, but also for the immune system, for prevention against allergies, and also for growth, obviously. So it's a very important topic, and I'm glad we're discussing this today.
I mean, breastfeeding is the first option, isn't it, Dr. K?
Absolutely, primary. So we know we call breast milk liquid gold. So the first 6 months of life, really all your child needs is breast milk, right? Obviously, things happen and we do the best that we can, and we can say that it's the gold standard and we can say that it's what we want, but there are some pretty good breast milk alternatives. We know in situations where breastfeeding exclusively for 6 months is not possible. And that's where our breast milk alternatives like formula come in. But absolutely, first 6 months of life, breast milk is the way to go.
I mean, what's in that breast milk that is such a vital thing for babies in their first year?
Literally everything, right? So obviously the things they need for their bodies to grow. So there's fat in breast milk, and it's the good fat, right? It's the brain fat. It's the fat that we need for our brain. It's the fat that we need for our eyes, and obviously the healthy fat that we need for our body. And in fact, the fat on the fat component, we know that breastfeeding your child decreases their risk for obesity later on, right? So that's just how healthy the fat is, that even from a long-term risk point of view, your baby is already protected. So really good stuff. And then there's obviously protein. You've heard of bodybuilders that buy breast milk from breastfeeding women. So we know that it's a very, 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 very good protein in terms of muscle building. Again, good for the brain and good for the body. Carbohydrates, which is the sugar, right? Very easily digestible. And that's why breastfed babies tend to be very chunky, right? Easily digestible. And that's also why the risk of constipation is so much lower in babies that are breastfed. But then there's also the stuff that is not necessarily just for growth, So we know good bacteria that affect and help the brain later on. We know immune properties that help with allergy prevention later on. So we know our babies that are breastfed have a lower risk of eczema. They have a lower risk for asthma. So even just in terms of food allergies, babies being exposed via the breast milk to all sorts of food already prevents your baby from having those allergies, or at least protects them somewhat against those allergies later on. So breast milk literally has every single thing. In fact, we learn more and more about breast milk every day in terms of what it comprises, and it really does have everything that your baby needs.
Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting that, many parents are doing this the whole day for 6 months, right? And
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
physical responsibility, but it's also got that bonding that you have as a mother. How often do
Yeah.
you breastfeed, right? Because some mothers are like, you know what, I'll breastfeed now, and then, maybe later in the afternoon I'll give them a different type of milk. How do you navigate the two? Or do you only do milk only, or can you just mix it up a little bit depending on also how much you're able to give as a mother?
Yeah. So I think you've mentioned some very important things there. So obviously the first thing is we do what we can. So if we can breastfeed throughout on demand for the full 6 months, first prize, right? In fact, they say that women who breastfeed up to 2 years of age have a lower risk of breast cancer, lower risk of uterine cancer, right? So we know that breastfeeding exclusively for as long as possible, first prize, right? I always explain to parents that the size of your baby's tummy is basically the size of their closed fist, not my closed fist. Your baby's tummy is the size of their closed fist.
Wow.
So you think that can't really take a lot, and it's even less in the first few days, right? And we see that a lot where mothers are just saying in the beginning, I just don't have milk. But really, those few drops are enough for your baby, because basically they need a teaspoon every 3 to 4 hours,
Oh,
just
wow.
because they're small. So they need a teaspoon of breast milk in the beginning. Obviously, it increases. And again, a thing that lots of people forget is that the tummy is a muscle, right? So it can stretch. Just like adults, most of us don't eat the size of our fists. We eat a lot more, and it's because our tummies have stretched.
Yeah, I know. Let's not talk about that, please.
Another topic for another day. Yeah, so basically, the baby's tummy is the size of their closed fist. Obviously, it grows, right? So in the first few days, it will be just a few drops. And then after that, it tends to increase, right? So going up to about 50 mils by the time they're, say, 3 to 4 months of age, right? Sometimes even more. So with regards to how we feed and where, obviously breast milk as much as possible. We say on demand, in the beginning, and that basically means when your baby is hungry and showing signs of hunger. So the rooting, where they kind of follow, searching for the breast everywhere. When they're doing that, then they're telling you they're hungry and you need to feed them. Having said that, babies' cues for when they're hungry and babies' cues for when they're full, extremely full, can be the same in the beginning. And that's where we find a lot of parents struggle, and we find a lot of babies tend to overfeed because my tummy is full and I'm so uncomfortable. So I'm rooting and I'm sucking. And again, that's where breast milk comes in, because once the breast is empty, it's empty, right? So then the baby carries on sucking, and we're
Okay.
happy because we know they are sucking for comfort, they're sucking for passion,
Soothing.
soothing. Sorry,
Yes,
thank
yes,
you.
sure.
Like a pacifier, using it like a pacifier. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say. And they're
Mm-hmm.
sucking for bonding as well. So there's many reasons beyond just hunger that your baby is going to want to feed. And that then puts some babies at risk, particularly babies that are fed breast milk alternatives like formula from a bottle, then puts them at risk for overfeeding, because they do want to carry on sucking for other reasons outside of hunger, right? I think in terms of when to feed what, we do our best. I think I have a lot of parents that sleep with the baby, a lot of mothers that sleep with the baby and just feed throughout, day and night, they're just breastfeeding. And that works well if you, for example, on maternity leave and you are in a position to co-sleep with your baby in a co-sleeper where it's safe, there's no siblings, partners far away, etc., because that, on its own increases the risk for cot deaths and things like that.
Yeah.
But I also have a lot of parents who choose to breastfeed at certain times.
Okay.
And so that mom can get a break, they may choose to then give formula, for example, at night, so that mom can take a nap,
Sure.
and then dad will take over the feeding. So, or express the milk and then give express milk through the bottle so that someone else can take over the feeding. And that helps them a lot. We generally say, obviously, breast milk is the gold standard. But we generally say that even a teaspoon of breast milk is going to be of advantage to your baby, because there's a lot of guilt around breastfeeding, right? Everybody has something to say about why you didn't breastfeed. Every family member, every neighbor, every cousin is going to say something about why you were not able to breastfeed. And a lot of mothers can breastfeed, but there's also a lot of mothers who can't breastfeed. There are very high non-breastfeed, or at least non-exclusive breastfeeding rates, right? So I think even a teaspoon, I think if moms can take away that even if you can breastfeed once a day and give your baby 1 teaspoon of breast milk, your baby is more at an advantage than a baby that gets no breast milk at all.
That's
and I think
so
sometimes,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
Because there's a pressure that you have so much to give to this child. And, I've never heard that a teaspoon is enough. I need to take a break, Dr. K, but when we come back, I want us to speak a little bit about, the alternatives, because sometimes, like with my son, I wish I had that boy's life. He's so lazy, such a lazy kid, always having it easy. I like very blasé. I'm like, I want this guy's life, because all he does is just lays around the whole day. But like, he didn't want to latch onto his mother's breast, right? And, we tried kind of trying to give him breast milk through lactation. And then we tried later on that, okay, let's try a formula. But he kind of enjoyed formula more than breast. I don't understand how that went. And then we had to do a little bit of research around the formula. And then we kind of found a formula that works for him. And I'm saying this because many mothers feel guilty that their child can't latch onto the breast, or they feel guilty that they're just too busy to make time for that breastfeeding moment. We'll touch on that, the alternatives to breastfeeding, because we don't want those mothers to feel guilty as well. But stay on the line. We'll come back to you after the break.
África. Conhece o Ntivani?
Claro que sou eu.
Ntivani é o amante da música de corpo e alma.
Eu amo música africana.
Ele aprecia todos os tipos de melodias e passa os seus dias a ouvir a Channel África. Adivinha só, a Channel África quer ajudar o Ntivani e os amantes da música em todo o lado a descobrir ainda mais música incrível. Por isso, a Channel África está a convocar artistas africanos a submeterem as suas músicas. Músicos, lembrem-se de nos dar todas as informações relevantes no music@channelafrica.co.za. As submissões são a vossa oportunidade de ser ouvidos, mas não garantem inclusão na lista. Todas as submissões serão cuidadosamente analisadas para verificar se cumprem os requisitos da nossa estação. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
You have got something in common. The thirst for knowledge.
All right, let's continue our nutrition conversation with Dr. Khutso Sebetseba, who is a specialist pediatrician, also runs a podcast using the identity Dr. K. You sound like an investigator in there. I like that term, Dr. K, Let's talk a little bit, Dr. K, around the alternative to breastfeeding. It's obviously formula. I know I tried convincing my partner, and we had a long conversation around breastfeeding, the importance of breastfeeding. I'm a journalist, so I'm always kind of like finding out these things like, let's do it this way. And she was like, no, he's not latching. I'm trying. I'm also struggling because he's not latching. I'm also not producing enough milk and all of that. And then we had to research an alternative, which was a formula, which he very grabbed quickly to the formula, and he enjoyed the formula more than any other thing. He was just becoming very irritated by this breast milk thing, right? So we just had to kind of find the alternative. And because of that, people find themselves feeling guilty that they couldn't do that. I had to kind of tell my partner, and we had a long conversation, that I don't blame you, because I wanted something, but it didn't mean that I blamed her for actually not being able to do so, because every scenario is so different. But could we speak about that people shouldn't feel guilty around not having that experience of breastfeeding?
Breastfeeding is easy, is like not even on TV. like basically on a magazine, right? And we all have this idea, most women have this idea that we want to breastfeed for 6 months. I mean, I thought I was going to breastfeed for 3 years. I wanted my babies to be asking for the breast by name. Like I was that mom, right? And a lot of the time it goes well, but actually more often than not, it doesn't go exactly according to plan. And I think that's what a lot of children have taught us over time, is that we make plans and babies are like, yeah, yeah. And I think probably what may have happened with your partner is, number one, like you said, just the sheer stress of trying to breastfeed a child who's not latching for whatever reason is going to decrease your milk supply, right? So stressing about it makes the problem worse. But you also can't help but stress about it, because how do you feed your baby if they don't want to feed on the breast, right? And I think it's an important thing to get to a point where we kind of forgive ourselves, like, yeah, this is what we wanted, but we also think that fed is best, right? So yes, breast is best, but fed is best, fed is better, right? And we're fortunate in that, you know, we actually do have alternatives, right? We do have alternatives that can make life a little bit easier, not just for baby, but for mom as well, you know. And formula is one of them. And what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of studies on formulas are based on breast milk. So of course, they'll never be able to replicate breast milk in terms of the immune properties, in terms of the very specific to your baby recipe that breast milk actually is. But a lot of formulas are made with breast milk as like a backbone or a case study. So they really are trying in terms of what they're adding in there and stuff, right? And that's why we say formula. We say formula that is adequate and appropriate for your baby's age and stage of development, right? We don't want milk from the fridge, for example. We don't want water, we don't want tea, we want formula. And we know that that has exactly the right amount of nutrients that your baby needs at every stage of development. So I think that, yes, we all want to breastfeed, and we know, right? And society reminds us every day that breast milk is the best thing for our baby. But a lot of the time, it's not going to happen according to plan, and it's totally fine. Again, like I said, breast is best, but fed is better, definitely.
And then that shift to solid foods, that's also kind of a tricky one, is it? What kind of solid foods, purees, what works? I remember we did some research where, you know, I found out that oranges were not good for kids under the year of 1 year old. So you can't puree everything, right?
No, we can't puree. And in fact, more and more, we're actually moving away from pureeing altogether. Well, not necessarily altogether, right? I use that with reserve. But we know that, for example, we want babies to be exposed both to variety and texture from day zero. So where before we'd say, you know, you wait for 6 months and you give them mush, 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 mush. Now we don't do that anymore. Having said that, we need to be sure that baby is ready for what we are telling them to do, right? So we said first 6 months, really breast milk or breast milk alternatives are what your baby needs. Around the age of kind of 4 to 6 months, when they show readiness, and that's the most important thing, is that your child needs to be showing readiness. And readiness is not a child who's not sleeping well at night, right? Because I think we see a lot of that. We see a lot of moms that will say, you know, my child is not sleeping at night, and as a result, I've started giving cereal, or I've started mixing some cereal into the bottle. And we know that that's not good, right? Especially in a child under the age of 4 months, especially in a child who's not showing readiness for food, right? And readiness means they're able to sit relatively upright with minimal support, and they're interested in food, right? So they're able to hold their head upright, they're able to sit upright, and most importantly, they're interested in food. And that doesn't mean anything but interested in food. So basically, when your child sees you holding a spoon, they are following that spoon to your mouth and coming back, and they're making the chewing, bubbly sounds with the mouth that show that they truly are interested in food. And that's then the best time to start. And in terms of what to start, like I said, everything, right? Oranges, not necessarily great, but not necessarily a danger on their own. We know that honey in children under the age of 1 is not a good idea because of the risk of certain toxins. And then we also know that uncooked meats are not necessarily safe. And some fish as well, because it may carry a very high kind of bacterial and mercury load, right? But in terms of what you give, it really is more texture, right? So you cook, boil the potatoes, the pumpkin, whatever the case may be, bash it with the back of a spoon or a fork. Or if you're going to blend, don't blend to complete oblivion and smoothness like a smoothie.
Sure.
It really needs to have some texture. So your baby knows from the beginning that food must feel like something in my mouth. I mean, we see a lot of cases of picky eating, of texture aversion, and of allergies, and a lot of it is because of how children were introduced to food in the first place. So that's quite important, that from the very beginning, food must feel like food, it must taste like food. Yeah, so I think that's the kind of the way I would go about it, is really one food at a time, so that if there is an allergy or some sort of reaction, we're able to identify it immediately. But from the beginning, variety and texture, 100%.
Fantastic. You're so helpful, Dr. K. I hear you have a podcast. I'm going to it. Let me know where I should go to check it out.
Okay, so I am the host of a podcast called Tiny Matters with Dr. K, my new baby. And it really is just conversations around all things parenting and all things children in kind of a very warm, non-clinical, relatable way that parents can understand. And it's on YouTube, Dr. K for Kids, and the show itself is called Tiny Matters with Dr. K.
Well, congratulations on that and all the best with it. Thank you for helping us with this one. I enjoyed how relatable you are, but also how conversational this was. And I'm actually proud of myself. I feel like, I'm not an absent father. I was there. I was
not at all. I'm
out.
very impressed. There was so much that you didn't need me for this.
No, we definitely did, because you are more of an expert than I am. Thank you so much, Doctor.
You're welcome. You're so welcome. Thank you.
All right. That is Dr. Khutso Sebetseba, who is a specialist pediatrician. Check out her podcast.